You know that feeling, right? That little jolt you get when you see something or maybe someone that just doesn't quite fit the picture.
Yeah. Like the person in full medieval gear at the supermarket.
Exactly. Or, that super specific collection someone has on their desk, or a conversation takes this sudden, really bizarre turn.
That little flicker of unease.
Yeah, that question mark pops into your head and you just think, okay, that is weird.
It's so universal, that feeling. Encountering something unexpected, something off script.
Absolutely. And that feeling, that whole concept weirdness, that's exactly what we're diving into today. Like, what is it? Why do we react like that?
And what can figuring it out actually tell us?
Yeah.
About ourselves, about society.
We've been digging through a whole stack of stuff, notes, research, different takes, all focused on trying to understand weirdness. It's a pretty interesting deep dive packet we've got.
Yeah, it really is.
So our mission here is to, unpack this really complex idea, look at it from different angles, maybe understand the surprising science behind our gut reactions.
And explore how navigating weirdness, the stuff we see out there, and maybe even, our own weirdness, how that shapes our lives.
So get ready to think about something you probably bump into every single day, but maybe in a totally new way. Like, why does it feel like that? What's it really mean? Let's jump in.
Okay, so starting with the basics. Fundamentally, weirdness is just deviation, right? Something that breaks the pattern of what we expect.
The normal. The
Yeah.
sort of shared social script we're all kind of following without thinking about it.
Exactly. And the material makes a great point, this deviation. It's not automatically good or bad. Often it's just surprising.
And how surprising or how weird it feels changes massively depending on the context, right? And also, I guess, how strictly those social rules are enforced wherever you are.
Oh, hugely. The exact same behavior could be seen as, intriguing in one place.
And totally out of line somewhere else.
Right. Or uncomfortable, offensive, maybe even feel dangerous, all depending on the where and the how.
You mentioned social norms. These seem like the absolute foundation for why anything feels weird at all.
They really are. They're like the invisible rule book we absorb growing up from family, friends, culture, media, everything.
And they dictate so much, don't they? Like basic etiquette, don't stare, say please.
What to wear for different occasions, how to talk to people, what topics are okay, what's taboo.
Even how you show emotions, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe don't burst into tears in a big meeting.
Probably not ideal, no.
Yeah.
Or calling someone at 3 a.m. unless it's a genuine emergency.
Definitely a norm violation.
Exactly. And it's breaking these rules, these often unconscious, deeply ingrained rules that flips that switch in our brain that goes, hold on, that was weird.
Okay, so step one is the deviation. Step two is like our internal norm detector going off. What does that detection actually feel like inside?
Well, the research describes it as this kind of uncomfortable blend. There's surprise, definitely, a bit of confusion, and often this sense of social tension. You just feel slightly on edge.
And how we deal with that tension, that feeling, leads to all sorts of different reactions.
Totally. You might get curious, like, why did they do that? Or you might jump straight to judgment.
Or even fear if it feels unpredictable or maybe threatening.
But it can go the other way, too. Sometimes it's admiration, like, wow, that's bold.
Or just plain disgust if it hits a hygiene button.
Ugh, yeah. And sometimes, thankfully, it's just funny, like utterly random and hilarious.
It's almost like weirdness is a mirror, isn't it?
Yeah.
It shows you the weird behavior, sure, but it also reflects back your own rules, your own biases, what you think is normal.
That's a great way to put it. It absolutely reveals our own internalized stuff. And to make sense of all these reactions, the material we looked at lays out weirdness on a kind of spectrum.
Okay.
Not necessarily from good to bad, but more about the level of social disruption it causes and the kind of emotional reaction it usually pulls from people.
Gotcha. So let's walk through that spectrum, starting mild.
Right. At the lightest end, you've got what you might call quirky. This is just slightly unusual, pretty harmless, like someone always wearing intentionally mismatched socks.
Or maybe they have a little verbal tick, something harmless.
Yeah. Your reaction is usually just mild amusement, maybe a little curiosity. Oh, that's kind of odd.
Okay, next level.
Eccentric. This is someone who's, consistently outside the usual norms. They have their own unique way of doing things, but again, it's not threatening.
Right, the classic eccentric. Maybe someone who collects, I don't know, thousands of rubber ducks. Or insists on speaking only in rhymes.
Exactly. You might be intrigued, maybe even a little impressed by their dedication to their own thing.
Then things get a bit more
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, you get into socially awkward territory. This is where someone unintentionally breaks those subtle rules of interaction.
Oh, I know this feeling. Like oversharing really personal stuff way too soon.
Or having just terrible timing in a conversation. Or maybe standing just a little too close for comfort.
Makes you cringe a bit, that secondhand embarrassment.
Definitely. Moving up, you get annoying weirdness. This is stuff that actively disrupts a shared space or demands attention in a way that grates on you.
Like someone blasting music on their phone on a quiet bus.
Or singing loudly and badly in public when it's clearly not a performance. You just feel irritated, probably dismissive.
Okay, getting more intense now.
Yep. Next up is disgusting. This violates those unspoken rules about hygiene or bodily functions.
Yeah. Picking your nose in public or someone describing something really graphic while you're trying to eat.
Just triggers that visceral revulsion. Then there's offensive.
Huh?
This is where the weirdness crosses a significant ethical or moral line for a particular group.
Like telling racist or sexist jokes, especially in a setting where it's clearly inappropriate and hurtful.
Right. That triggers anger, maybe backlash. Then we get into stuff that feels genuinely unsettling. Uncanny weirdness.
The uncanny valley.
Exactly. Something that's subtly wrong in a way that evokes this kind of dread. It's almost normal, but not quite.
Like those hyper-realistic robots with the dead eyes. Creepy.
Super creepy. It just feels alienating. Next level is threatening weirdness. This involved the perceived potential for actual harm.
Someone yelling incoherently and maybe walking quickly towards you on an empty street.
Yeah, that triggers immediate fear, that protective fight or flight response.
And the far end of the spectrum.
Transgressive weirdness. This is behavior that deliberately smashes really deep societal taboos, moral, legal, sometimes religious codes.
Things like public self-harm, or maybe desecrating a symbol that's sacred to a group, actions that provoke horror, condemnation.
It's a huge range, isn't it? Shows how that initial, that's different, can scale all the way up to something deeply disturbing, all based on what norms are broken and how.
So seeing that whole spectrum, it really makes you wonder, why do we even do that? Why do we feel this need to label something or someone as weird? What's the social function?
Well, there are a few things going on, according to the material. One big one is boundary setting.
Right, like by pointing out the outlier, you reinforce what's considered normal for the group.
Exactly. It shores up the edges. It's also a form of group signaling. You turn to your friend and go, wow, that was weird, right?
And if they agree, it reinforces your connection, your shared understanding of the rules.
Precisely. It builds solidarity. And it ties into a kind of quick moral sorting. We make these fast, often unconscious judgments about safety, trust, belonging, based on how much someone deviates.
Is this person predictable? Are they part of us?
And sometimes, let's be real, it can be projection. Calling someone else weird might be a way to avoid dealing with our own discomfort, or maybe even a hidden envy of their freedom.
Ooh, that's interesting. Avoiding our own stuff by pointing fingers.
Yeah.
But it's just so vital to remember, like you said earlier, this labeling is incredibly contextual.
Massively. What's weird is totally relative. The packet had great examples, like a goth kid might be seen as super weird in a small conservative town.
But totally fit in, maybe even be cool at an art school in a big city.
Or eating insects. Completely normal, even a delicacy in many parts of the world, but considered deeply weird in, say, mainstream American culture.
Yeah, context is everything.
Yeah.
And this is really important when you think about people who communicate differently, right?
Absolutely. People on the autism spectrum, for instance, or with other forms of neurodivergence, they might have different social cues or ways of interacting that get labeled weird, but it's not intentional norm breaking, it's just a different operating system.
So it's often unfairly stigmatizing in those cases.
Definitely. So, bottom line, weirdness is contextual, often cultural, sometimes used unfairly, but that doesn't mean weirdness itself is always bad.
Right. The material also frames it as potentially positive, like a lens into our own conditioning.
Or a form of resistance against norms that maybe should be challenged.
A catalyst for creativity, or humor, or change.
Think about it. How many artists, inventors, thinkers throughout history were initially seen as totally weird? Their ideas were way outside the box at the time.
That's so true. The weirdos often paved the way. Okay, so that covers the social landscape of weirdness. Let's shift gears and look inside our heads. What is actually happening in the brain when we encounter something? Off. This section of the deep dive was fascinating.
It really is. Our brains are basically pattern recognition machines, right? They evolved to find regularities, predict what's coming next. It saves energy, helps us navigate the world safely.
Makes things efficient,
But-
predictable.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
weirdness, well, that's a pattern break, a glitch in the matrix.
And the brain snaps to attention.
It absolutely does, because that break could signal something important. Maybe danger, maybe a social mistake you need to avoid making yourself, or maybe just new information that needs updating your mental map of the world.
And that mismatch, that doesn't compute signal, creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance.
Right, which feels uncomfortable, inherently a bit stressful.
Like a little internal alarm bell.
Pretty much. And there are specific brain areas that jump into action. You've got the amygdala, that ancient alarm system.
The emotional core.
Yeah. It lights up for things that are novel, ambiguous, potentially threatening.
Hmm.
And weirdness is often ambiguous, isn't it? So the amygdala says, whoa, pay attention here. Caution.
Like a very quick subconscious gut check.
Exactly. Then there's another part, the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC. Think of it as the brain's error detection or pattern monitor.
Okay.
It's constantly checking, does this match my expectations? When something feels off or weird, the ACC flags it. That contributes to that feeling of unease, maybe social awkwardness.
And while all that's happening almost instantly, the thinking part of the brain is trying to catch up.
Right. The prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain, steps in to interpret, judge, regulate. It might eventually reason, okay, it's just a guy in a costume, he's harmless.
But the initial jolt, that weird feeling, already happened.
The gut reaction beat the rational thought. And then there are parts involved in thinking about ourselves and others. The default mode network.
How does that play in?
Well, seeing weird behavior triggers these automatic social comparisons, like, would I ever do that? What does this say about them?
Are they like me? Are they different?
Exactly. And that self-other processing can feel uncomfortable if the weirdness challenges our own sense of what's normal or acceptable, our identity even.
Okay, so the brain flags the pattern break. But here's the really interesting question from the material. If something isn't actually dangerous, why do we still often have that negative gut reaction? Why the discomfort, even with harmless weirdness?
Great question. There's several layers to it. One is about social risk assessment, kind of an evolutionary hangover.
Right.
Our brains are wired to quickly figure out if someone fits in because way back when, group cohesion was critical for survival. Someone breaking norms, even minor ones, could unconsciously signal unpredictability, maybe rebellion.
Stuff that might have been risky for the group back then.
Exactly. So it's like an old safety program running on outdated software, sometimes flagging harmless things.
Like an oversensitive smoke detector.
Kind of. Another factor is simply cognitive load. Processing something unexpected takes more mental effort than dealing with the predictable. Our brains like efficiency.
Weirdness makes you think harder, figure things out.
And we're inherently a bit lazy, mentally speaking. Then there's something called moral contamination bias.
Sounds serious.
It's usually subtle. But even mild weirdness, if it vaguely touches on something taboo or abnormal, can trigger a tiny disgust response. It's like an overgeneralization of the instinct to avoid things that could actually be harmful, like disease vectors.
So a misplaced yuck feeling.
A little bit. And finally, just pure social conditioning. We are trained from day one almost to value fitting in, to follow the rules.
So weirdness feels wrong simply because it breaks those learned rules.
A lot of the time, yes. Our reaction says more about our training than about the actual event.
Not everyone recoils, right? Some people are actually drawn to weirdness. Why is that?
Yeah, totally. The research points to personality traits, like having higher openness to experience. People who are naturally curious, creative types, artists, they often seek out novelty.
They see weirdness as interesting, maybe inspiring.
Exactly. For others, especially maybe adolescents or people in countercultures, embracing weirdness is part of forming their identity, signaling they belong to a different group.
A way to stand out or stand with others who stand out.
And sometimes it's just how you frame it. Humor reframes weirdness as playful. Curiosity reframes it as intriguing. People who are more comfortable with ambiguity, who don't need everything neatly categorized, tend to enjoy weirdness more.
That uncanny valley thing seems like the perfect example of the brain struggling with that ambiguity.
It really is, that creepy feeling you get from something almost human, but not quite. It's unsettling mostly because the brain can't easily slap a label on it. Human, machine. That struggle itself causes discomfort.
Less about threat, more about confusion.
Exactly. Categorical ambiguity is uncomfortable.
So really understanding this, the pattern matching, the gut reaction, the struggle with ambiguity, That's actually pretty powerful, isn't it? For changing how we react.
It's incredibly empowering because once you're aware of that initial jolt, that discomfort, you can
You
pause.
can ask yourself, okay, wait, is this actually a threat? Or is my brain just freaking out because it's unexpected?
Right. It lets you consciously choose curiosity over judgment, or at least temper the judgment, which is huge when you encounter different cultures, different perspectives, or just people whose brains work differently.
Okay, so we've got the definition, the social side, the brain science.
Yeah.
Where does this leave us, personally? Is it fundamentally bad to be weird? Or is it bad to be averse to weirdness?
Well, the short answer from the material seems to be no, not inherently, to both. It's much more nuanced than that. Weirdness itself, like most things, has potential upsides and downsides, heavily depending on the context.
So when is leaning into your own weirdness actually beneficial?
Oh, lots of times. It's crucial for creative work. Right. Originality often starts out looking weird. Think artists, scientists, entrepreneurs.
Innovators are often weird first.
Totally. It's also vital for personal authenticity. Embracing your unique quirks builds self-acceptance, confidence. It adds to cultural diversity. We need different perspectives. And it drives social transformation. Challenging norms that need changing often requires being weird.
Think about civil rights activists, early feminists, LGBTQ plus pioneers. They were definitely outside the norm. But, okay, when is being weird maybe risky or less helpful?
In really rigid environments, maybe a super formal workplace or a very conservative community being too weird can lead to negative consequences like isolation or professional setback.
Context matters.
Hugely. Also, if your weirdness isn't paired with self-awareness, if it's constantly making others uncomfortable unintentionally, it can hinder relationships. Timing is key. Too intense weirdness at, say, a funeral is probably not appropriate.
Right place, right time.
And sometimes, sadly, behaviors labeled weird can stem from deeper struggles, like mental health issues, which need compassion and support, not just judgment.
Okay, what about the flip side? Being averse to weirdness, when is that protective or useful?
Well, an aversion to genuinely harmful or dangerous weirdness is obviously adaptive for group safety. It helps maintain order and predictability.
Reinforces boundaries that keep things running smoothly.
Exactly. It contributes to cultural cohesion. And sometimes that gut reaction of disgust or offense towards certain violations acts like a moral compass for the group.
When does that aversion become a problem?
When it tips into intolerance, when it suppresses valuable differences, leading to prejudice or failing to accommodate neurodiversity, when it closes your mind to new ideas or experiences.
When it stalls progress because anything new feels weird and threatening.
Right, and when it just reinforces fear and anxiety, making us less flexible and resilient in a diverse world.
So feeling that initial, whoa, that's weird, is normal brain stuff. But letting that feeling dictate your whole response, letting it harden into judgment or fear, that's where we can maybe intervene.
Precisely. The packet used this really nice metaphor, weirdness as fertile soil.
Oh.
Like a wild garden. Some weirdness is like invasive weeds. It chokes out good stuff, that's the harmful kind. But other weirdness is like unexpected wildflowers, enriching, beautiful, maybe adds resilience.
So the goal isn't to pave over the whole garden.
Exactly. It's about cultivating discernment, learning to tell the weeds from the wildflowers, recognizing what's genuinely harmful versus what's just different or maybe even beneficial.
That really brings it back to us, the listener, thinking about what's the weirdest thing you've encountered that you actually ended up admiring? Where's your personal line between quirky, interesting, and uncomfortable, unsafe?
Or have you ever been labeled weird? How did that feel? What did you learn from it? The material really pushes for that kind of self-reflection.
Understanding your own relationship with weirdness seems like the crucial first step. And that leads perfectly into some really practical guidance that was in the packet. How do we actually manage this relationship with our own weirdness and with others? It breaks it down into a few key situations.
Yeah, this was super helpful. Let's start with one many people grapple with. When should I maybe dial back my own weirdness? Be a bit less weird.
And this is tricky, right? Because maybe authenticity is super important to you, or maybe weirdness is a defense mechanism, or maybe you're neurodivergent and trying to act normal is exhausting and feels wrong.
Totally valid challenges. But the idea isn't suppression, it's modulation. Times when it might be beneficial include really formal or high-stakes settings, job interviews, meeting the in-laws for the first time.
Places where fitting the expected script builds initial trust or credibility.
Right. Or when you're just building rapport with someone new, predictability can feel safer early on. Also, Maybe think about it if you're processing really intense emotions. Sometimes extreme weirdness can be a way to deflect vulnerability when connection is actually what's needed.
Or just recognizing if your particular brand of weirdness is consistently making others unintentionally uncomfortable in group settings without serving a purpose beyond self-expression.
Or perhaps honestly assessing if you use weirdness to keep people at arm's length as a barrier to intimacy rather than an invitation.
Okay, so if you decide modulation is needed, what are some strategies?
The material suggested things like practicing a bit of social mirroring, subtly observing and aligning with the energy or communication style of the room without losing yourself. There was the headphone test.
Oh yeah, like if someone put on headphones and missed the last 5 minutes, would what you're about to say or do make any sense out of context?
Kind of a reality check filter. Asking trusted friends for gentle, honest feedback is huge. Hey, sometimes when you do X, it lands a bit strange. Have you thought about why?
Practicing intentional pauses.
Yeah.
Just taking a breath before jumping in can prevent anxious weirdness from spilling out.
And maybe journaling about unmet needs. If the weirdness is a bid for attention or connection, are there healthier ways to ask for or find that? The core idea here feels really important. You can be true to yourself without displaying every single facet of yourself all the time. Some parts can just be for you or for your closest people.
Exactly. It's about choice and context, not hiding. Okay, flip side. When should I lean in? When should I embrace being more weird? Let that freak flag fly a little.
And this can be hard too, especially if you've learned to prioritize fitting in, if you're a perfectionist afraid of looking foolish, or if you've been shot down before for being too much.
Definitely. But situations where embracing weirdness is powerful include any kind of creating, performing, brainstorming. That's where originality lives.
Let the weird ideas out.
Absolutely. Also, in safe, affirming spaces with friends, chosen family, communities where individuality is genuinely celebrated, go for it there.
Use it when you're clarifying your own identity. Trying on different kinds of weird can actually help you figure out who you are underneath the shoulds.
And definitely embrace it when you're challenging unhealthy norms or speaking truth to power. Sometimes weirdness is the most effective tool for disruption. Oh, and please, embrace it when you're just being honest about what you love. Your passions might seem weird to others, but that's okay.
Totally. Strategies here. Try doing one small, slightly weird thing each day. Wear a weird accessory. Hum an unexpected tune. Just to build the muscle.
Track the reactions. You might be surprised how often people don't notice, don't care, or are actually amused or intrigued. It helps challenge the fear.
Have private rituals of weirdness, dance crazy in your kitchen, write surreal poetry nobody sees. Find your weird tribe people who get and appreciate your specific flavor of weird.
And celebrate tiny rebellions. Order the strangest thing on the menu. Take an unusual route home. Just because.
The mindset shift here is thinking. Your weirdness is like a language. Not everyone will understand it, but the right people will recognize you when you speak it. It helps you find your people.
Okay, scenario 3. Someone else is being weird and is bothering me. It's crossing a line. When should I stand up for myself?
Yes, this is critical. Not all weirdness is okay. Sometimes it's genuinely harmful or disrespectful. But it's hard to push back, right? You don't want to seem judgmental. You might fear conflict.
You might even doubt yourself, like, is my boundary reasonable?
Exactly. But you should consider standing up when their weirdness consistently crosses your personal boundaries. Maybe it's too loud, too invasive, too personal. When it feels like they're using weirdness, maybe strategically, to dominate a space or conversation.
Like sucking all the air out of the room with their eccentricity.
Or when you're being subtly blamed or made to feel like the problem because you're reacting to their inappropriate weirdness.
Definitely if you feel unsafe, psychologically or physically. Erratic behavior plus threats or boundary violations is a red flag.
And also, if their weirdness requires you to tolerate something that deeply violates your own moral or ethical code, weirdness isn't a free pass for disrespect or harm.
So how do you stand up? Strategies.
Trust your gut, that inner alarm. If it feels wrong or unsafe, pay attention. Learn some simple boundary-setting scripts.
Like just, hey, I'm not comfortable with that, or that's not okay with me, or let's change the subject.
Simple, clear, direct. Set boundaries proactively if you anticipate issues. Practice asserting yourself in low-stakes situations to build confidence. And importantly, debrief with people you trust afterwards to validate your feelings and make sense of it.
The core mindset. Protecting your safety, comfort, and values is essential. You can respect difference without sacrificing yourself.
Exactly. Okay, last scenario, and maybe the hardest for some. When should I consciously try to lower my guard when someone is being weird? Choose compassion or curiosity instead of immediate judgment.
Yeah, this is tough if you've been burned before, or if you rely heavily on social rules to feel secure, or if you just have that strong internal weird, wrong programming.
But consider lowering your guard when the person might be neurodivergent or socially anxious. What looks like intentional weirdness might just be their natural way of being or a sign of their own discomfort.
When they might be exploring identity, like a teenager trying out different personas, or going through something tough like grief or healing weirdness often surfaces during transitions.
If their weirdness is clearly playful, creative, and not malicious, sometimes it's just an expression of joy or imagination. When they seem to be being genuinely vulnerable, not just performing for attention, weirdness can be raw honesty struggling to get out.
And this one is deep. When their weirdness kind of echoes something in yourself that you've maybe pushed away or judged, our strongest reactions often tell us about our own stuff.
That's a big one. Strategies for lowering the guard. Try consciously reframing. Instead of what's wrong with them, ask, what might this behavior be expressing?
Practice curiosity. If it feels safe, ask open, non-judgmental questions like, that's interesting, tell me more about why you do that.
Silently acknowledge your own discomfort. Just naming it, okay, I feel awkward right now, can stop you from immediately reacting negatively. Intentionally expose yourself to different kinds of weirdness through art, film, diverse communities.
And explore your own hidden weirdness. Letting your own quirks out a bit can build empathy for others.
The mindset shift. Weirdness isn't always a threat or a problem. Sometimes it's an invitation maybe to connect, maybe to laugh, maybe to learn, maybe to be more compassionate. Pause before you pounce.
That's incredibly helpful practical stuff. Stepping back again, the material also encouraged thinking about weirdness through some deeper, more philosophical or cultural lenses, like weirdness is a kind of secret disruption.
Yeah, think about figures in myths or history, the oracle, the prophet, the shaman, the court jester, often outsiders, often seen as weird, but they held special knowledge or signaled necessary change. Their weirdness broke patterns to reveal something important.
It also acts like an evolutionary testing ground for culture itself.
How so?
Like weird ideas or behaviors are like cultural mutations. They get introduced, tested out in the social environment. Some die out, others get adopted and become the new normal.
Yeah,
Societies kind of need that experimental lab to adapt.
that makes sense. And weirdness isn't always just happening. It can be a deliberate tool for power and resistance.
Right. A way to signal noncompliance, to disrupt oppressive norms, to hide in plain sight, or to build solidarity among an outgroup. Think punk, think drag, think certain protest movements.
It can be tactical, subversive,
Yeah.
not always just innocent self-expression. And sometimes it's more like a performance.
A performance like faking it.
Not necessarily faking, but maybe amplifying it, like armor. Or a cry for recognition if being invisible feels worse than being ridiculed. Sometimes theatrical weirdness is a way to force people to see you.
Wow. It can also be an encounter with the other in a really deep sense. Not just socially different, but touching the unknown, the uncanny, the limits of our understanding.
Like a philosophical threshold. Makes you question your own reality a bit.
And the cognitive dissonance we talked about, the brain's error signal. It's not just uncomfortable. Material frames it as a portal. Yeah, like the raw material for an epiphany. When your mental model fails, that discomfort is an invitation to learn, to update, to see things differently. It's where growth happens.
I like that. Dissonance is opportunity. And finally, a lovely one. Relational weirdness.
Ah, yes. The weird stuff you only do with people you're really close to.
Exactly. Shared inside jokes, bizarre nicknames, quirky rituals. In close relationships, that shared weirdness isn't just tolerated, it's often a sign of deep safety, trust, and intimacy. It's a love language, almost.
It really is. Where the masks come off,
Yeah.
the material also makes you think, what's the cost of a culture that's really averse to weirdness, that demands conformity above all?
Yeah, if there's zero tolerance for deviation, creativity probably dries up, authenticity becomes dangerous, progress stalls because new ideas feel too risky.
Social anxiety probably goes through the roof because everyone's terrified of stepping out of line.
It seems like a culture's attitude towards weirdness, how much difference it can tolerate or even celebrate, tells you a lot about its overall health, its freedom, its potential for growth.
What a journey we've covered. Seriously, from just defining weirdness as deviation from norms,
To the social rules, the spectrum of reactions.
then diving into the brain science, that fascinating pattern break response,
It's getting really practical with strategies for navigating it in ourselves and others.
and finally looking through these deeper cultural, evolutionary, even spiritual lenses.
It's clear weirdness is definitely not simple, not just good or bad. It's this complex, dynamic force with so many facets.
And hopefully, understanding even a bit more about it can change how you see those unexpected moments, how you react to people who color outside the lines.
And maybe, just maybe, how you embrace the unique, wonderful, possibly slightly weird parts of yourself too.
So a final thought to leave you with, maybe. The next time something strikes you as truly weird, whether it's out there in the world or bubbling up inside you, can you meet that moment? Not just with the instant judgment or recoil, but with maybe a conscious pause.
And perhaps just a little more curiosity, or even a little more grace.